Today I'm going to be showing you how to beat a child in chess using the King's Gambit. Now I know this opening definitely works because I myself have employed it against children in the past. The other thing is that children often have coaches, and coaches are notorious for making kids memorize openings without actually explaining how anything works, all the while fleecing the poor parents for little Timmy's college fund. Anyways, fair warning, if you do use this opening, you may have to explain yourself to some angry parents for why their child has been crying for the last 30 minutes. But as I said before, just blame it on the coach. Now it starts off with e4, and most kids are gonna play e5 thinking this is just an innocent Italian game. It's not. We play f4, already giving up a pawn. And most kids are gonna have a mini existential crisis at this point thinking, I don't know whether to take this pawn or continue with an Italian game. A lot of the time they're just gonna continue on by taking the pawn. After they do, we entice them with bishop to c4, allowing this pretty little check. Now, as I said, a lot of coaches are going to be telling kids, hey, look out for checks and use them whenever you can. So likely little Timmy here is going to play queen to h4 check. And now, if you were thinking to block the check with the g3 pawn, you're actually out of luck because this loses the game to pawn takes. And now you've lost the game because you can't take back because you lose a rook, and or you can lose a rook this way. So that's problematic. You don't want to do that. Here you simply want to play king to f1. Looks a bit weird, right? And little Timmy's going to think to themselves, wow, he gave up his castle rights. I got rid of them. I'm so strong. I've already given a check and I'm up a pawn. And this is presuming little Timmy knows something about attacking chess. So he's going to play something like bishop to c5, threatening this nice little checkmate on f2. Not there. On f2. And to refute bishop c5, we simply play d4, kicking the bishop away. Now, if this video hasn't helped you out yet, I got another option for you. Not that. Hit subscribe and I'll teach you more openings that'll be useful in your future tournaments. Enjoy the rest of the video. After bishop to b6, now we can play knight to c3, attacking the queen. And now you might be wondering, where do I move this queen? I'm going to give you three options. First though, we're going to look at why would Timmy never play queen back to d8. Because kids will naturally go after the attack once they have it started. So they're not going to bring the queen back to the starting square, and they may bring the queen to e7, but there are a few ways we can trick kids. So queen to e7, now we play king to f2, seemingly giving up this pawn. After rook to e1, you've lost the queen because it's pinned to the king. So, in which case, Timmy's left with just a few options. Now, the knight on c3 is covering this square, so you can go here, here, or here. So which would you choose if you were little Timmy? I got bad news for you if you chose queen to g4. The reason being is that now there's bishop takes f7 check, and if the king takes, you lose the queen this way. So now that we've established that queen to g4 is not an option, Timmy's likely going to play something like queen to h6. After queen to h6, defending the f4 square from the bishop, we continue development naturally. Now knight to c3, and if you look at this, we've got a pretty good attack in the center, and three of our pieces are developed as opposed to black's one piece and an underdeveloped queen. So we're already at an advantage. Timmy's going to realize this very soon once his coach walks over to the table and starts berating him in his head. Alright, so after knight to c6 attacks the center, makes perfect sense, right? Here we play knight d5. After knight d5, there's no way you can defend this pawn effectively. g5 weakens your dark squares way too much, and if it actually doesn't even save the pawn for you, because after g5 we play h4 and force a trade here. So after bishop takes f4, queen to h5, now that we've done enough on the king side, we want to push our queen side, starting with a4, preparing to push this bishop into a box. After they free up some squares to their bishop with a5, putting the bishop on a7 potentially in the future, now we simply take it. And after takes, bishop takes d6. Bishop takes d6, wins a pawn, and now it can easily be attacked, this bishop I mean, but black isn't going to do that. They're going to continue development, potentially try and recover some of the attack that they originally had. So after bishop to g4, pinning the knight to the queen in some capacity, first we play pawn to d5. After pawn d5, kicking away the knight comes back to a7, now we play pawn to h3, and kind of forcing a trade here, because if you move the bishop, now we can just move our knight into the attack, and then force a trade of queens, and we're just going to have a much better position than black. So after bishop takes, pawn takes, if you look, black is only down a few pawns and all the pieces are equal. It's not like you're up too much, but actually at this point in the game, white is up plus 1.9 in the position, basically plus 2. Here black is able to castle because the king never crossed the path of the bishop. It was here to here. So this also makes sense because the rook now opens up an attack on the bishop. However, white is completely winning here, and I'm going to show you how they can potentially finish up this game. The thing about juniors and kids is that they never resign. That's something that they're taught not to do, but they still for some reason do. Anyone who's ever played in a classical chess tournament or any chess tournament of any kind against a child will know that these guys are resilient. So after bishop to h2, tucking the bishop away for another day, knight to f6, finally developing the knight, right? Just rook to g1. And here you can't play pawn to g6 to defend your g7 pawn because bishop to e5, and now you've lost either a knight or a rook. Pick your poison. So instead, black will normally play rook to g8, and this makes sense. Now bishop to e5 anyway. Maybe setting up a trade because you are up some pawns. It's a good idea to trade. King to d7, trying to defend the knight from afar. After rook to d1, putting the rook on the x-ray of the king, always a good idea when you're trying to attack and potentially close up a game. Knight to h5, defending the pawn, relieving some of the troubles that you had earlier on, but putting the knight on the rim of the board controlled by the bishop. Now, if you don't know, this is a nice relationship between the knight and the bishop where the bishop covers these squares, the only available squares for the knight to jump to. So it is a bit of a stalemate in its own capacity. After bishop to d4 here, attacking this b6 pawn, there's really no way you can defend it without playing knight to c8. Knight to c8 is also the only available square for your knight, and the prior king move to d7 did actually allow this to happen in the future, so it was a little bit calculated. We now play pawn to e5. Pawn e5, expanding on the king side, expanding in the center, apologies, and after pawn to f6, trying to disrupt the central attack, we don't take it back. We first give a check with bishop to b5. You always want to look out for checks. Exactly what the kids are taught as by their coaches. Look out for checks and use them whenever you can. Don't rush into going into these exchanges because they might immediately benefit you, but not in the long term. So after king comes to safety, we push our other pawn and give another check. After king comes to b8, now forcing the king into this weird corner of the board that it can never escape from, we now push the pawn even further. Here, they're not going to give up their knight. They're going to play knight to e7. And after knight to e7, we play bishop takes b6, attacking the rook. After rook to f8, we now push the pawn and make a queen. Queen, rook takes, bishop takes. Obviously, you could have taken with the rook as well and forced yourself into an endgame, but it's better to keep this rook on the open file, and this bishop will come in handy later on, stopping the king from escaping to this square. So after knight comes to f5, we just simply push our pawn forward. We don't want to rush into anything else. Just push the pawn forward, prepare to solidify our bishop here. The rook can't come this way because the bishop is covering, so now black's best move is king to a7, potentially getting away from the back rank to avoid any forced checks. But as you'll see later on, that's not going to work out for black very well. After pawn to e7, solidifying the bishop's position on d8, knight takes e7 is the best move that black has. After bishop takes e7, now you push the pawn on h6 and rook to d8, forcing a trade that black can't escape from. Rook takes, bishop takes, knight to f4, and at this point you might think that black would be better off resigning, but as I said, they never will. So you don't want to take this pawn straight away. First of all, you want to kick away the knight a little bit with bishop to c7, attacking the knight. Knight comes back, and now you can put the bishop on a5, further locking in this king from getting away from these squares. After pawn to b6, kicking away the bishop as they normally would, bishop to c3, remaneuvering our bishop once again. Now black will normally play a g5 because they'll realize that holding onto that pawn is probably the best bet they have to potentially winning this game. We don't take this pawn immediately. Now it looks like we've hung a pawn as well, but that's not what we're going to do here. We're going to play king to f2, free up these squares for the rook to come into the attack. So instead, after king to b7, maybe potentially getting away from some checks early on by putting the king here. Rook to d1 anyways. After rook to d1, now f5, defending the pawn by pushing it forward away from the eye of the bishop. But as I said, in an attacking game, we don't want to go after this minor material. We want to just try and smother this king with all sorts of pieces and potentially set up a checkmate. After bishop to e5, there are very little pieces for black to move, very little options. After knight c5, you play b4, kicking the knight away once again, back to e6. After e6, now you play a check with the rook, forcing the king to the back rank. Now this is exactly where you want the king. After you play rook to a7, setting up a checkmate, a lot of the times king will start running away. Here we will chase down the trail of tears with bishop to f6 check. Now if you look, the king only has one square remaining on the board, and that's king to c8. After king to c8, we don't immediately give a check on a8 and allow the king to escape to the 7th rank. We first play bishop to e5. At this point, you want to play bishop to d6. After bishop to d6, if you look at the position, we're attempting to cut off the king by the bishops. This is going to be pretty difficult to stop by black, so if they try something like knight to d4, attacking one of our pieces, we put it on d7, and now if you look, the bishops have created a force field that the king cannot escape from. These squares are completely inaccessible, and this is defended by the rook. But it's still not checkmate, because if you were to give a check here, you'd lose a rook, right? And unfortunately for black, there aren't really many squares for the knight to go to. But say at this point, if black realizes that and just plays something random like pawn to f4, trying to draw out the game, potentially bait you into playing rook a8 so you can win a bishop. Here you play pawn to c3, kicking away the knight, stopping this knight from defending the bishop on c6. Here they will keep their knight exactly where it is in order to keep the defense of the c6 and e6 square. They're the ones that we will be using for setting up checkmate, but they still have some efforts. I mean, after pawn to g4, setting up pawn g3, who knows, potentially maybe even getting a queen into the game, because they won't resign here. Here you just take the knight. After pawn g3 check, king g2. Now there are no king moves whatsoever, as I said before. So after pawn to b5 or even pawn to h5 or pawn to h5, you just simply play bishop to c6. After bishop c6, there is no way you can stop rook a8 checkmate. And if you look at the position here, the bishops cover these squares, and the king has simply nowhere to go. After, you can try escaping this way, but this is once again checkmate, but in a more beautiful fashion. So that is how you beat a child in chess. I hope you guys will be using this in your first ever or in your future chess tournaments. I know that I've had great success with it, and I mean, the King's Gambit is an underrated opening that they have been playing for the last few hundred years. Anyways, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe, and have a great day.